The morning of September 7th, 1944, arrived cold and grey across the Kummersdorf proving grounds southeast of Berlin, where Hauptmann Klaus Reinhardt stood before a machine that would force him to reconsider everything he believed about American tank design. The M4A1 Sherman, designated War Daddy 2, sat silent in the testing field, its olive drab paint still bearing the scars of combat from Tunisia, where it had been captured from the 1st Armoured Division 8 months earlier. German mechanics had already spent weeks examining the tank's Continental R975 engine and studying its automotive systems, but today's test would reveal something far more unsettling than mere mechanical reliability. Oberlieutenant Friedrich Weber climbed onto the Sherman's hull, his hands running across the turret ring with professional curiosity. Weber had spent his pre-war years as a gunnery instructor at the Panzertruppenschule in Münster, where he had trained countless crews on the technical specifications of German tank guns. He understood the mathematics of rate of fire, the physical limitations imposed by breech design, ammunition weight, and crew ergonomics. What he was about to discover would challenge those assumptions in ways that made him question whether German tank design had prioritized the wrong characteristics entirely. The German evaluation team had been testing captured Allied tanks since early in the war, analyzing their strengths and weaknesses with methodical precision. According to documents preserved in the German Federal Military Archives, these evaluations represented serious attempts to understand enemy capabilities and identify potential vulnerabilities. The Sherman, however, had proven more complex than initial assessments suggested. Its armor was adequate, but not exceptional. Its 75mm gun lacked the penetrating power of German weapons, yet American tanks kept coming, kept fighting, and somehow maintained offensive pressure that German forces found increasingly difficult to counter. Reinhardt had been ordered by the Wehrmacht's Weapons Testing Office to conduct a comprehensive evaluation of the Sherman's gunnery characteristics. The brass wanted specifics on the tank's firing cycle, the time required for the crew to acquire targets, load ammunition, and execute sustained fire. German intelligence had reported that American tank formations seemed capable of delivering exceptionally high volumes of fire during engagements, but the mechanism behind this capability remained unclear. Was it simply numerical superiority, or did the American tank possess some technical advantage that German engineers had overlooked? If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Inside War Daddy 2's fighting compartment, Weber experienced his first revelation about American tank design philosophy. The turret interior was spacious by German standards, with ample room for the gunner and loader to move without constantly bumping into equipment or each other. The seats were mounted on adjustable rails, allowing crew members to position themselves optimally for their tasks. Most significantly, the entire turret basket rotated with the gun, meaning the loader maintained the same spatial relationship to the breech regardless of turret position. This seemed like a small detail, but Weber recognized its significance immediately. In German tank designs, particularly the Panther and Tiger, loaders had to adjust their positions constantly as the turret traversed, sometimes stepping over equipment or navigating around ammunition racks while trying to feed the gun. The Sherman's rotating basket eliminated this problem entirely, allowing the loader to work from a consistent position with a predictable workflow. Weber examined the 75mm M3 gun's breech mechanism with growing interest. The vertical falling wedge breech block operated semi-automatically, ejecting the empty shell casing immediately after firing and cocking itself open, ready to receive the next round. This eliminated several steps that German loaders had to perform manually. On a Tiger or Panther, the loader had to open the breech, extract the spent casing, dispose of it in the proper receptacle, then load the next round. The Sherman's gun handled the extraction and ejection automatically, shaving precious seconds from each firing cycle. The ammunition storage arrangement revealed another advantage. Early production, Shermans had placed ready rounds around the base of the turret basket, giving the loader immediate access to 12 shells plus 8 more in a foot-level rack. While this arrangement proved dangerously vulnerable to fire, it demonstrated American thinking about ammunition accessibility. Even in later wet storage versions, the Sherman maintained accessible ready racks that allowed loaders to maintain high firing rates for sustained periods. Technical documentation from Aberdeen Proving Ground indicated that the Sherman's 75mm gun possessed a theoretical maximum rate of fire approaching 20 rounds per minute. Weber found this figure almost impossible to believe. German tank guns typically achieved between 6 and 10 rounds per minute in combat conditions, with the Panther's 75mm KWK-42 managing perhaps 8 to 10 rounds from its ready racks before the rate slowed considerably. The Tiger's 88mm KWK-36, according to British motion studies conducted after the war, required 6 to 16 seconds per round, depending on turret position and which ammunition bin was being accessed. 20 rounds per minute meant the Sherman could theoretically fire a round every 3 seconds. Such a rate seemed physically impossible, given the size and weight of the ammunition. Each 75mm shell weighed nearly 7 kilograms, and the complete fixed round with propellant casing brought the total weight to over 6.5 kilograms. Loading, ramming, and firing such rounds at 3-second intervals would require not just a fast loader, but a system designed specifically to enable rapid fire. Reinhardt assembled a German tank crew experienced in operating captured Allied vehicles. These men had been working with the Sherman for weeks, familiarizing themselves with its controls and operating procedures. They understood the layout of the ammunition racks, the peculiarities of the gun's stabilization system, and the idiosyncrasies of the power traverse mechanism. Today, they would push the tank to its limits, conducting sustained fire exercises that would either validate or disprove the reported American firing rates. The test protocol was straightforward. The crew would engage a series of targets at varying ranges, firing as rapidly as possible while maintaining reasonable accuracy. German observers would time each shot, measure the intervals between rounds, and document the crew's performance over extended firing sequences. At 0900 hours on that September morning, the test began. The Sherman's Continental engine rumbled to life, and the turret traversed smoothly to face the first target positioned 300 meters downrange. Weber, observing from a protected position with stopwatch in hand, noted the time as the gunner called out his first target acquisition. The gun fired. 3 seconds later, it fired again, then again, and again. The rhythm was mechanical, almost metronomic, as the loader worked with practiced efficiency to feed round after round into the breech. Empty shell casings ejected automatically, clattering onto the turret floor in a growing pile of brass. The gunner made minor adjustments between shots, the gun's stabilization system helping him maintain his aim, despite the recoil. Weber watched his stopwatch in growing disbelief. 15 rounds in 47 seconds. That was approximately 19 rounds per minute, nearly matching the theoretical maximum and far exceeding anything German tank guns could achieve in practice. The loader showed no signs of slowing, his movements fluid and economical as he extracted rounds from the ready rack, loaded them into the breech, and stepped clear for the gunner to fire. Oberlieutenant Heinrich Becker, the senior weapons evaluator from the Ordnance Department, stood beside Reinhardt with his own stopwatch, verifying Weber's measurements. Becker had spent his entire career working with artillery and tank guns, and he understood the physical limitations that governed rates of fire. What he was witnessing violated those assumptions. After 20 rounds, Weber called a halt to observe conditions inside the turret. The German crew emerged, sweating and energized by the experience. Inside the fighting compartment, empty shell casings littered the floor, but the turret remained remarkably uncluttered. The semi-automatic breech had ejected casings into a bin beneath the gun, keeping them away from the crew's feet for the most part. The loader reported that he had barely needed to move from his position, simply reaching down to the ready rack, loading the round and stepping back for the next shot. Most significantly, the loader emphasized how easy the shells were to handle. The 75mm rounds were shorter and lighter than comparable German ammunition. The Panther's 75mm rounds, while similar in caliber, were significantly longer due to their higher velocity propellant charge, making them more awkward to maneuver in the confined space of a turret. The Sherman's rounds could be grasped and loaded with one smooth motion, while German ammunition often required more careful handling. Becker ordered a second test, this time with sustained fire until the ready racks were exhausted. The crew would continue firing until they had to begin accessing the floor-mounted ammunition storage, simulating extended combat conditions where ready rounds had been depleted. The second test commenced at 0930 hours. Once again, the 75mm gun began its steady hammering, rounds departing at roughly 3-second intervals. The loader worked through the first 12 readily accessible shells, then began drawing from the secondary ready rack at his feet. The firing rate slowed slightly as he adjusted his movements, but only to approximately 1 round every 4 seconds, still far faster than German tanks could manage. After exhausting the 20 rounds in the ready racks, the loader had to access the floor-mounted ammunition storage. In this particular Sherman variant, that meant opening armored doors in the turret basket floor and extracting rounds from the hull-mounted racks below. The firing rate dropped noticeably during this phase to perhaps 1 round every 7 to 8 seconds as the loader had to bend down, open the armored box, select the appropriate ammunition type, and bring it up to loading height. Even at this reduced rate, the Sherman was firing faster than a Panther could manage from its ready racks, and crucially, the American tank carried 97 rounds of 75mm ammunition in various configurations, giving it the staying power for extended engagements. Weber climbed back into the Sherman's turret to examine the ergonomics that made such performance possible. He noted how the loader's position provided clear access to the breech from a standing or half-standing posture. The gunner sat at the right front of the turret with excellent visibility through both his telescopic sight and periscopic sight. The commander stood behind them with an overhead periscope that could scan a full 360 degrees. Every crew position seemed designed to minimize wasted motion and maximize efficiency. By contrast, German tank turrets tended to be cramped affairs, where every centimeter of space was contested between equipment, ammunition, and crew. The Panther's loader, in particular, worked in difficult conditions. The large 75mm rounds had to be extracted from bins scattered throughout the turret and hull, often requiring the loader to reach across the breech or behind the commander to access stored ammunition. According to British motion studies declassified decades later, the Panther's average loading time ranged from 6 seconds under optimal conditions to over 20 seconds when accessing difficult ammunition bins with the gun elevated. The Tiger managed slightly better at 6 to 10 seconds per round from optimal positions, but these figures assumed experienced crews working under ideal conditions. In combat, with stress, smoke, noise, and the constant threat of incoming fire, actual loading times stretched longer. The Sherman, Weber realized, had been designed with an entirely different priority structure. American engineers seemed to have asked themselves how they could enable a trained but not necessarily exceptional crew to maintain high performance under adverse conditions. They had optimized the workspace for the specific tasks that crew members needed to perform repeatedly under stress. Every detail, from the rotating turret basket to the semi-automatic breech to the ammunition rack placement, served the goal of maintaining sustained fire. Reinhardt ordered a third test, comparing the Sherman directly against a Panther tank that had been brought to Kummersdorf for maintenance. Both tanks would engage the same target array, firing as rapidly as possible while maintaining reasonable accuracy. German crews experienced in both vehicles would operate them, eliminating crew skill as a variable. The test began at 1300 hours. The Panther, with its powerful 75mm KWK-42 gun, engaged targets with devastating accuracy. Each round struck with authority, demonstrating why the Panther was feared by Allied tank crews. But the firing rhythm was noticeably slower than the Sherman's had been. The loader worked hard, extracting the long, heavy rounds from their storage bins and wrestling them into the breech, but the intervals between shots stretched to 5, 6, sometimes 7 seconds. After 2 minutes of firing, the Panther had delivered 16 rounds. Respectable performance, representing a firing rate of about 8 rounds per minute, well within the expected range for the tank. The gunner reported excellent visibility and fire control, and the loader confirmed that he was working at maximum sustainable speed. The Sherman's turn came next. Using the same 2-minute time frame, the American tank fired 28 rounds, averaging 14 rounds per minute, even including the time needed to transition from ready racks to floor storage. The difference was stark and undeniable. In a sustained firefight, the Sherman could deliver nearly twice as many rounds as the Panther in the same time period. Weber documented everything meticulously in his evaluation report. He calculated that in a 3-minute engagement, assuming both tanks began with full ready racks, the Sherman could fire approximately 40 rounds, while the Panther fired 24. This represented a 67% advantage in volume of fire, and in combat, where suppression and rapid target engagement often proved decisive, such advantages could determine the outcome of encounters. More troubling for German tactical thinking was what this meant for numerical engagements. If an American tank platoon of 5 Shermans encountered 2 German Panthers, the firepower disparity favored the Americans by an overwhelming margin. The Panthers might possess superior armor and gun performance, but they would be facing approximately 200 rounds of incoming fire in the first 5 minutes of combat, compared to the 80 rounds they could deliver in return. The evaluation team conducted additional tests over the following days. They examined the Sherman's gun stabilization system, which helped gunners acquire targets more quickly after stopping. They analyzed the turret traverse speed, finding that the electrically powered system could rotate the turret 360 degrees in 15 seconds, approximately 24 degrees per second. This gave Sherman crews the ability to track moving targets or shift between multiple threats with remarkable speed. By comparison, the Panther's traverse speed varied dramatically depending on engine RPM, and the system struggled to rotate the turret on even mild slopes. German tank commanders reported frequent frustration with slow traverse rates that left their gunners unable to track fast-moving targets or respond quickly to flanking threats. The fire control system impressed Weber, perhaps more than any single component. The combination of the gyroscopic stabilizer, the fast traverse, and the semi-automatic gun created a weapons system that could engage targets with remarkable speed. An experienced Sherman crew could spot a target, traverse onto it, and fire their first round in under 10 seconds. Subsequent rounds followed at 3 to 4 second intervals, allowing the crew to achieve multiple hits before the target could react effectively. Becker compiled a comprehensive report for the Weapons Office detailing the findings. His conclusions were carefully worded to avoid seeming defeatist, but the implications were unavoidable. The American M4 Sherman tank possessed a rate of fire advantage over German medium tanks that partially offset its deficiencies in armor protection and gun penetration. In combat scenarios involving multiple tanks engaging at medium ranges, this advantage could prove decisive. The report noted that Sherman crews could potentially achieve first-round hits through volume of fire even without superior gunnery skill. If a Sherman fired 3 rounds in the time a Panther fired 1, the American crew only needed to achieve 33% accuracy to match the Panther's hit probability. Perhaps most significantly, the sustained fire capability gave Sherman crews psychological advantages that were difficult to quantify. German tank crews reported feeling overwhelmed when facing multiple Shermans, not because any single American tank was particularly threatening, but because the cumulative volume of incoming fire created an environment of constant danger. The morning of September 21, 1944, brought Hauptmann Reinhardt an unusual visitor to Kummersdorf. General Inspekteur der Panzertruppen, Heinz Guderian, the Inspector General of Armored Troops and one of Germany's foremost experts on tank warfare, had requested a personal demonstration of the Sherman's gunnery capabilities. Guderian had built his career on understanding how armored vehicles could be employed most effectively, and he wanted to see firsthand the American tank that was causing such discussion among German tankers. Weber prepared War Daddy 2 for another demonstration firing, ensuring the ammunition racks were fully loaded and the gun properly maintained. Guderian arrived with his aide and several officers from the Panzer Arm, all men who had extensive combat experience and understood the practical realities of tank warfare. They gathered around the Sherman as Weber explained the findings from 2 weeks of intensive testing. Guderian listened intently, occasionally asking pointed questions about specific technical details. He wanted to know about the breech mechanism's reliability, whether the high rate of fire caused excessive barrel wear, how the gun performed after firing 50 or 60 rounds in rapid succession. Weber answered each query with data from the testing program, demonstrating that the American gun maintained its accuracy even after extended firing sequences. The demonstration firing commenced with Guderian observing from a protected position adjacent to Reinhardt's command post. The Sherman engaged a series of targets at ranges from 200 to 800 meters, the 75mm gun working with mechanical precision. Round after round, departed at steady intervals, the turret traversing smoothly between targets, the loader feeding ammunition with practiced efficiency. Guderian watched in silence, his face betraying nothing, but his aide took extensive notes. After the Sherman had fired 40 rounds in approximately 3 minutes, Guderian walked to the tank and requested permission to examine the interior. Weber accompanied him into the turret, explaining the ergonomic features that enabled the rapid fire capability. "The Americans understood something we did not," Guderian said finally, running his hand along the turret basket rail. "They designed this tank for men to fight in, not for machines to perform theoretical calculations. Every detail serves the crew's ability to operate effectively under stress. We, Germans, sought technical perfection. The Americans sought practical effectiveness. In war, their approach proves superior." The general's assessment validated everything Weber had concluded during his evaluation. The Sherman represented a fundamentally different design philosophy, one that prioritized human factors and sustainable combat effectiveness over peak performance specifications. Guderian requested a comparison test, the Sherman against a Tiger tank that was undergoing maintenance at Kummersdorf. The Tiger represented Germany's most formidable armored vehicle, a 60-ton beast mounting the feared 88mm KWK-36 gun. The test commenced late that afternoon. Both tanks engaged the same target array, firing until their ready racks were exhausted. The Tiger's 88mm gun spoke with authority, each round departing with tremendous kinetic energy capable of penetrating any Allied tank at combat ranges. But the firing rhythm was slow, deliberate, each shot representing a complex sequence of loader movements and breach operations. British firing trials conducted during the war documented that the Tiger required 6 to 16 seconds per round, depending on turret position and ammunition bin accessibility. The German crew at Kummersdorf performed well, managing roughly 7 to 8 seconds per round from the ready racks, but this still represented only about 8 rounds per minute sustained fire. The Sherman, engaging adjacent targets, maintained its characteristic rhythm. 3 seconds, 4 seconds maximum between shots, round after round hammering downrange with relentless consistency. Where the Tiger fired once, the Sherman fired twice. Over a 5-minute engagement, the Tiger delivered 42 rounds, while the Sherman fired 68, a 62% advantage in volume of fire. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The implications of the Sherman's rate of fire advantage extended beyond simple gunnery comparisons. Weber began analyzing how this characteristic would affect tactical scenarios encountered on the actual battlefield. He constructed models of typical engagement distances, terrain conditions, and force ratios that German units were encountering in France and Italy during the autumn of 1944. The results proved disturbing from a German perspective. In close-range engagements, where multiple tanks were involved, the Sherman's rapid-fire capability allowed American crews to suppress German positions effectively, even without achieving penetrating hits. The volume of incoming rounds forced German crews to button up their tanks, limiting their observation and ability to return effective fire. Historical records from American after-action reports compiled by the Army Ground Forces and preserved in the National Archives documented how Sherman crews developed tactics specifically designed to exploit their rate of fire advantage. When encountering German heavy tanks, Sherman platoons would often split their fire, with some tanks engaging to suppress and blind the enemy, while others maneuvered for flank shots. The 27th of September brought another test, this one examining how the Sherman's characteristics would affect combat in the hedgerow country of Normandy, where engagement ranges rarely exceeded 300 meters and ambushes occurred at point-blank distances. Weber set up targets at varying ranges from 50 to 300 meters, simulating the sudden encounter battles that characterized bocage fighting. The Sherman excelled in these conditions. Its fast turret traverse allowed it to engage multiple threats in rapid succession, while the high rate of fire enabled crews to achieve multiple hits even against partially concealed targets. In one test sequence, the Sherman engaged 5 targets, representing German tanks positioned at varying angles and ranges. The crew acquired and engaged all 5 targets in under 90 seconds, firing 12 rounds and scoring 8 hits. A Panther, conducting the same exercise, required 2 minutes and 20 seconds to engage all 5 targets, firing only 7 rounds due to its slower rate of fire. The difference represented not just a 15 to 20 second advantage, but potentially the margin between survival and destruction in actual combat. Weber's final evaluation report, submitted to the Weapons Office on the 3rd of October, 1944, represented one of the most detailed analyses of American tank design produced by German intelligence. The document ran to over 70 pages, including technical specifications, comparative performance data, tactical assessments, and recommendations for German forces encountering Sherman tanks in combat. The report's conclusions carefully balanced technical assessment with tactical reality. The Sherman possessed significant advantages in rate of fire, turret traverse speed, gun stabilization, crew ergonomics, and sustained combat capability. These advantages partially compensated for its deficiencies in armor protection and gun penetration power. German crews should not underestimate Sherman tanks based solely on their armor and gun specifications. Most troubling was Weber's assessment of what the Sherman's design philosophy revealed about American military thinking. The United States had created a tank optimized for mass production, ease of operation, and sustained combat effectiveness. They had accepted that their tank would be inferior in direct one-on-one comparisons with German heavy armor, but had designed a vehicle that could be produced in overwhelming numbers, maintained under field conditions by moderately trained personnel, and operated effectively by crews with limited experience. Reinhardt submitted the report through proper channels, uncertain what reception it would receive. German military culture in 1944 was increasingly unwilling to acknowledge enemy advantages, particularly in areas like tank design, where German propaganda had long proclaimed superiority. To Reinhardt's surprise, the report received serious attention at multiple levels of command. Copies circulated to Panzer Division commanders, tactical training schools, and weapons development offices. Some readers rejected its conclusions, arguing that German tank superiority remained unquestionable. Others, particularly those with recent combat experience, recognized the validity of Weber's analysis. General Oberst Heinz Guderian ensured that extracts from the report reached frontline commanders with specific tactical recommendations. German crews should avoid prolonged firefights with multiple Sherman tanks at close range, where American rate of fire advantages would prove decisive. They should exploit German advantages in armor and gun power by engaging at longer ranges, where the Sherman's 75mm gun became progressively less effective. The winter of 1944 through 45 brought German tank crews face to face with the realities that Weber's report had outlined. In the Ardennes offensive that began on the 16th of December, panzer units encountered American armored formations whose Shermans employed exactly the tactics that German evaluators had predicted. German tank commanders who survived the war later recorded their experiences facing American armor in interviews preserved by the United States Army Center of Military History. Repeatedly, these accounts emphasized not the individual superiority of Sherman tanks, but the cumulative effect of facing multiple vehicles that could maintain sustained fire while maneuvering aggressively. Oberst Hans von Luck, commanding a panzer regiment in Normandy, noted in his post-war memoirs that American tank crews seemed capable of maintaining offensive action even when individual tanks were being knocked out. The rapid replacement of losses, combined with the Sherman's capability for sustained combat, created an enemy that refused to be intimidated or suppressed. The 11th of November, 1944, found Oberlieutenant Weber at a panzer training facility near Munich, where he had been assigned to incorporate lessons from captured equipment studies into crew training programs. He lectured to classes of new tank crews, many of them teenagers with minimal training time, about the realities they would face when encountering American armor. The American Sherman is not a superior tank, Weber told his students. Its armor is thinner than a Panther's, its gun is less powerful than a Tiger's, but it is a more complete weapons system designed to enable its crew to fight effectively for extended periods. You will not defeat Shermans by relying on our armor and gun to protect you. You will defeat them through superior positioning, longer engagement, ranges, and by preventing them from achieving the crossfires they seek. The training curriculum Weber developed emphasized several key principles. German crews should avoid static defensive positions where American tanks could mass fire against them. They should use terrain to limit the number of Shermans that could engage simultaneously. They should prioritize targets that were advancing or maneuvering, as these represented the greatest threat. The Sherman's rate of fire capability also had implications that extended beyond direct tank combat. American armored formations used their tanks extensively in infantry support roles, where the ability to deliver sustained high explosive fire proved invaluable. The 75mm M48 high-explosive round contained 1.5 pounds of TNT, and a Sherman could pump these rounds into enemy positions at a rate that devastated dug-in infantry and fortifications. Historical accounts from American infantry divisions documented how Sherman fire support made the difference in numerous engagements. When American infantry encountered stubborn German resistance, Sherman tanks could bring devastating firepower to bear rapidly and accurately. The 23rd of December, 1944, brought Weber back to Kummersdorf for a final evaluation session. The Weapons Office wanted updated assessments of captured Allied equipment, incorporating combat experience from the Ardennes offensive that was then reaching its crisis point. Weber arrived to find the proving grounds largely abandoned, with most personnel and equipment evacuated westward as Soviet forces approached Berlin from the east. A handful of evaluators remained, including Hauptmann Reinhardt, who had stayed to complete final documentation of testing programs before the facility was permanently closed. They walked through the nearly empty proving grounds, past the testing ranges where Weber had first documented the Sherman's rapid fire capability 3 months earlier. Your report caused quite a stir, Reinhardt told Weber as they examined the Sherman one final time. Some officers accused you of defeatism for praising American equipment. Others argued that you had identified critical vulnerabilities in German tank design that should have been addressed years ago. But everyone who read it with an open mind recognized the truth in your analysis. Weber climbed into the Sherman's turret, running his hands over the controls one final time. He thought about the American crews who had operated these tanks, the young men from farms and factories who had been given a machine designed for their capabilities and needs. We asked the wrong questions when we designed our tanks, Weber said finally. We asked how we could build the most powerful tanks, the most heavily armored, the best performing. The Americans asked how they could build tanks that average crews could operate effectively for extended periods under combat stress. In war, their question proved more important than ours. Reinhardt nodded slowly. By the time we realized it, we lacked the resources and time to change course. Even if we had begun designing tanks with American principles in 1943, they would not have reached production before the war ended. The final months of the war demonstrated repeatedly how the Sherman's characteristics suited it for the kind of warfare the Western Allies waged. American armored divisions advanced across Germany with remarkable speed, maintaining offensive pressure that German forces could not counter. When German units attempted to establish defensive positions, American tanks could bring overwhelming firepower to bear, using their rate of fire advantage to suppress and destroy resistance before continuing their advance. German tank crews, when they managed to achieve favorable positions and adequate supplies of ammunition and fuel, could still win individual engagements. A well-positioned Panther or Tiger remained deadly to Sherman tanks at medium and long ranges, but such encounters became increasingly rare as German logistics collapsed and American forces learned to avoid situations where German advantages could be fully exploited. The crew ergonomics that Weber had identified as central to the Sherman's effectiveness proved their worth in the war's final months. As American replacements with increasingly limited training joined combat units, the Sherman's intuitive layout and ergonomic design allowed these men to become combat effective more quickly than comparable German replacements in Panthers or Tigers. The 8th of May, 1945, brought the war in Europe to its official conclusion. Oberlieutenant Weber, who had survived the final chaotic months and surrendered to American forces in Bavaria, found himself in a prisoner of war camp surrounded by the very tanks he had evaluated 8 months earlier. Hundreds of Shermans filled the surrounding fields, their engines running smoothly as they prepared for occupation duties or potential redeployment to the Pacific. An American technical sergeant, learning of Weber's expertise with captured equipment, approached him about serving as a consultant for the United States Army's evaluation of German tank designs. The Americans wanted to understand why German tanks, which appeared so formidable on paper, had proven insufficient to stem the Allied advance. Weber agreed, seeing an opportunity to continue his work and perhaps influence future tank designs. The irony was not lost on Weber, as he sat in an American evaluation center explaining German tank design philosophy to young American engineers. He described the thinking that had led to the Panther and Tiger, the emphasis on armor thickness and gun power, the acceptance of mechanical complexity in pursuit of combat dominance. The Americans listened politely, taking notes, asking questions about specific design choices. Then they showed him their next generation of tanks, the M26 Pershing, which had appeared in limited numbers during the war's final months, represented American evolution of tank design. It mounted a 90mm gun capable of engaging any German tank effectively. It had thicker armor than the Sherman, angled for maximum effectiveness, but it retained the design philosophy that Weber had come to respect: spacious crew stations, accessible ammunition storage, systems designed for maintainability and sustained operation. We learned from the Sherman's successes and its limitations, the American engineer explained. The 75mm gun was adequate for most of the war, but by 1944, we needed more penetrating power. The Pershing gives us that while keeping the characteristics that made the Sherman effective: reliability, crew efficiency, sustainable combat power. Weber examined the Pershing's interior, noting how American designers had incorporated lessons from combat experience while retaining the fundamental principles that had made the Sherman successful. The loader still worked from a spacious position with good access to ammunition. The gunner still had excellent visibility and ergonomic controls. In the months that followed, as Weber assisted American evaluation efforts, he came to appreciate how thoroughly American military thinking had internalized the lessons of tank warfare. They understood that victory came not from building the technically best tank, but from building tanks that could be produced in sufficient numbers, operated effectively by available crews, and sustained in combat over extended campaigns. German tank designs, captured and evaluated by American and British technical teams, received mixed assessments. The Panther's armor scheme and gun performance impressed evaluators, but they noted the cramped fighting compartment, the complex and unreliable transmission, the difficult maintenance requirements. The Tiger commanded respect for its heavy armor and powerful gun, but evaluators documented the slow turret traverse, the challenging ammunition handling, the excessive weight that limited mobility. Most significantly, Allied evaluation teams recognized that German tanks had been designed for a different kind of war than the one actually fought from 1943 onward. German armor doctrine had emphasized mobile warfare with deep penetrations, where individual tank quality and crew skill could achieve decisive results. But by late 1943, Germany was fighting a defensive war of attrition, where sustained combat capability and sustainable production mattered more than peak performance. The Sherman had been designed, perhaps not entirely consciously, for exactly the kind of war that developed. Long campaigns requiring sustained combat operations where tanks needed to remain functional for weeks or months with field maintenance, where crews needed to fight effectively despite limited training time, where losses needed to be replaced rapidly from mass production. Weber's post-war lectures to American military audiences emphasized this point repeatedly. "We Germans built tanks for the war. We wanted to fight," he told them. "You Americans built tanks for the war. You actually had to fight. That is why you're Sherman." Despite being inferior to our tanks in many individual characteristics, proved to be the more effective weapon overall. The American officers, listening to these lectures, took notes and incorporated Weber's insights into their own planning for future armored vehicle development. They recognized that technological superiority meant nothing if it came at the cost of reliability, maintainability, or crew effectiveness. These lessons influenced American armor development throughout the Cold War and beyond. The emphasis on crew ergonomics, sustainable combat capability, and practical effectiveness over theoretical perfection became hallmarks of American tank design. The story of German engineers discovering the Sherman's 20 rounds per minute firing capability became a cautionary tale in military education. It illustrated how design philosophy mattered as much as technical specifications, how human factors could be as important as armor thickness or gun caliber, how seemingly minor details like loader ergonomics could have strategic implications. Hauptmann Reinhardt, who survived the war and eventually worked in the automotive industry, reflected on the Sherman evaluation in his memoirs published in the 1960s. "We spent weeks testing that American tank," he wrote. "We documented every specification, timed every operation, analyzed every detail, and what we learned was not about American engineering superiority, but about the difference between building machines and building weapons. The Germans built impressive machines, the Americans built effective weapons. In war, effectiveness matters more than impressiveness." Weber himself rarely spoke about his wartime experiences, focusing instead on rebuilding his career in the post-war German automotive industry. But in one interview conducted in the 1970s, he addressed the question of what single lesson had most impressed him from evaluating captured Allied equipment. "The Sherman tank taught me that design is about making choices, not about maximizing every specification," Weber said. "American designers chose to optimize for sustained fire capability at the expense of gun power. They chose crew ergonomics over compact dimensions. They chose mechanical simplicity over peak performance. Every choice involved trade-offs, and in isolation, some of their choices seemed suboptimal. But when you examine the complete system operating under actual combat conditions, their choices proved remarkably well suited to the task." The surviving examples of War Daddy 2's test documentation, preserved in military archives, provide a detailed record of how German engineers approached the evaluation of enemy equipment. The meticulous measurements, the systematic testing protocols, the careful documentation, all demonstrated professional competence and intellectual honesty. The broader question of why German tank design evolved as it did, prioritizing characteristics that proved less important than sustained combat effectiveness, occupied military historians for decades. Multiple factors contributed. German military tradition emphasized technical excellence and individual superiority. German industrial constraints made it impossible to match American production volume, encouraging emphasis on quality over quantity. All these factors produced tanks that excelled in the conditions their designers anticipated but struggled in the conditions that actually developed. The Panther was magnificent for rapid advances across open terrain where its speed and gun range could be fully exploited. The Tiger was devastating in defensive positions where its armor and firepower dominated engagement ranges. But both tanks struggled in the sustained attritional combat that characterized the war's final 2 years. The Sherman, conversely, was designed for exactly these conditions, not through superior foresight, necessarily, but through a design philosophy that emphasized sustainable combat capability over peak performance. The rate of fire advantage that Weber discovered at Kummersdorf exemplified this design philosophy. The Sherman's 75mm gun was not the most powerful weapon available. Its armor-piercing rounds struggled against German heavy tank armor. But the complete fire control system, the gun, the stabilizer, the turret traverse, the ergonomic crew layout, the ammunition stowage arrangement, enabled crews to achieve high hit rates through volume of fire. This approach to tank design influenced post-war thinking far beyond the American military. NATO standardization efforts incorporated lessons about the importance of crew factors and sustained combat capability. Even Soviet tank design, which had traditionally emphasized simplicity and mass production over crew comfort, began paying more attention to ergonomics and crew efficiency. The final word on the Sherman's rapid-fire capability perhaps belongs to an anonymous German tank commander whose after-action report survived in captured documents. Writing after an encounter with American armor in December 1944, he noted, "The American tanks engaged us with such volume of fire that we could not observe the battlefield effectively. Each time we attempted to fire or reposition, multiple rounds would strike our armor. While none penetrated, the constant impacts were terrifying and disorienting. We withdrew not because our tank was damaged, but because we could not fight effectively under such conditions." This psychological dimension of the Sherman's rate of fire proved as important as the physical damage the rounds inflicted. German crews learned to fear encounters with multiple Shermans, not because any individual American tank was particularly dangerous, but because the cumulative effect of facing constant sustained fire from multiple sources created conditions where effective combat became nearly impossible. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.